In this third and final lecture on market segmentation, let's look at an example that I created that might help us to understand the rest of the process. By looking at a product that we probably all have somewhere close to us right now, a thumb drive. Now, if you look at all the different elements of why we buy a thumb drive, we look at storage, reliability, transfer speed, security, price, novelty, style. These are just some of the reasons that we would look for a specific thumb drive. And again, we can look at all of these different models that are out there, all the different prices that are out there, but this doesn't really tell us the whole story. But if we start to organize it into different segments, if you will, we can have the novelty segment, security segment, and the price style segment. Now, as you can imagine, the price style, because it's a lower price, is going to be a much larger market than the other markets that are out there. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward. The next step in the segmentation process looks at how attractive one particular segment is over another. If we look at the attractiveness of a market depends primarily on three things: market growth, competitive intensity, and market access. Market growth entails not only the size of a segment, but perhaps even more importantly, its growth rate. While a large market on its surface may look more appealing, markets that are growing may lead to greater success in the long term. This is especially true of markets that are currently small and may not have had any competitors take a look at it or grab much of a market share in that segment. Attractiveness also will depend on the competitive intensity found in the market. A segment that has high market growth can be unattractive for the exact same reason we talked about earlier, although in this case, a competitor has already grabbed a percentage of the pie and there may not be much left. Competitive intensity also relates highly to Porter's five forces model, although this is at the segment level. Now, for a segment to be attractive, it must be accessible. This is true not only in access to the proper channel, but also is enhanced by a brand's familiarity with segment members. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. The next step in the process is segment profitability. And when we examine profitability, one of the things that marketers do is that we use what's called net marketing contribution, which is basically a measure of the contribution to a company's profits that a specific action is going to take after subtracting marketing and sales expenses. We'll discuss this in more detail next week, but for now, let's look at an example of three segments that appear to be attractive. Looking at our thumb drive example, we identified three segments: security, novelty, and style. Each of these segments will have varying levels of sales volume and margins, and will also differ in terms of marketing expenses to achieve these levels. A product in the security segment, for example, will require a more intensive marketing campaign targeted toward a small group of buyers than will an entry into the style segment. Although the style segment, we're going to be making less money, less margin, if you will. At first glance, the style segment may look very appealing given its size of $800 million. And if you, for example, compare that to the novelty segment of $250 million or the security segment at $100 million. But going one step further, the novelty segment generates higher sales revenue than the other two segments combined. By taking margins into account, the security segment, even with its larger expense ratio, has the highest net marketing contribution. Before fully making a decision we would want to look much deeper at the attractiveness factors such as growth rate, the number and strength of competitors, and how familiar we are to competitors. For example, the security segment will likely be made up of buyers who take data security very seriously and probably have some experience in IT. And if we already sell a product in the IT arena and we're well known for security, it's going to be much easier for us to get into there to that segment as opposed to if we were very unknown to the buyer. Next, we'll look at segment positioning. And positioning can basically be looked at as the placement of a product or service in the minds of a selected target market. So the positioning is basically what we're trying to convey, what message we're trying to convey to the market segment we're going after about our product. What is it we want them to think when they hear our product? For example, if we think Volvo or think Michelin, we're thinking safety. That's one of the first things that pops into my mind because that's how they have positioned their products. So we can look at positioning as a means through which marketers determine how best to communicate the features and attributes of the product to the target. And each segment represents a unique set of challenges. To address these challenges, marketers need to establish a unique value proposition for each segment. And what that looks at is what are the benefits that the customer is looking for in purchasing this product. In other words, a unique selling proposition is the distinct benefits that set our brand apart from competitors. According to Jack Trout and Al Reyes, who are the preeminent positioning guys, positioning is not what you do to your product, but what you do to the mind of the prospect. Positioning is basically broken down into three different types. You have functional positioning, symbolic positioning, and experiential positioning. Now, functional positioning highlights the basic problem that the product is trying to solve. For example, Domino's spent most of their advertising dollars stressing the fast delivery of its pizza rather than the taste or quality. Functional relates more to the utilitarian benefits that is the focus of our attributes on the product, how ownership of the product will be helpful, and what need it is fulfilling. Symbolic positioning, on the other hand, focuses on enhancing the customer's self-image and/or stroking their ego. Most prestigious products use symbolic positioning to alter how the customer feels or think they will feel by owning the brand. Many personal care products, and again, like I said, most prestige products use this type of positioning. Personal experiences allow consumers to connect more fully with the brand in a way much stronger than just merely informing them about the features of a product. Making connections with consumers becomes more difficult, though, as more and more advertising messages are thrown at us. Experiential marketing helps the company cut through all this clutter by connecting in new and unique ways. However, it's not always that simple, of course. Experiential positioning is all about the hedonic benefits and how the product makes you feel. Research has shown that consumers put more value on hedonic benefits as opposed to the utilitarian benefits from functional positioning, but only after they are fully understanding of what the product does, the functional part. But it is risky to set out to position your product this way, as consumers may be more likely to just ignore what you're telling them if they don't fully understand the product. Take a look at this next commercial that is using an experiential positioning.
What's G? It's the emblem of a warrior. It's the swag of an athlete, a champion, and a dynasty. What's G? It is the heart, hustle, and soul of the game. That's G.
I don't know about you, but after watching this commercial for a few times, I'm still not sure what G is. Often, competitors move into the market and begin to chip away at positioning with a position that we own. If we do not manage the ongoing process, we may find ourselves that there's no more room left in the marketplace for where we want to be. When this happens, typically a brand will reposition itself. And repositioning involves changing what customers associate with the brand and typically involve changing the brand's promise and personality. Repositioning, though, is not the same thing as rebranding, which is changing the entire identity of the brand, such as the brand name, logo, etc. One way that the difference between these two was explained to me was that if a brand was a person, rebranding would entail changing the hair color, losing weight, wardrobe, changing a name, everything, while repositioning would basically be changing the values, personality, and the behavior of that person. At times, it becomes difficult to gain traction in a market due to a well-entrenched competitor, or there's just not enough room for a unique position available for you to carve out for your brand. One strategy to deal with this has been to get the market to look at your competitor in a completely different way. For example, when Pringles was introduced in the market, they came in and they captured a nice market share. And one of the, I guess, the losers of this was Wise potato chips. But they were able to reposition Pringles in the customer's mind by listing some of the Pringles non-natural ingredients that really sounded like harsh chemicals but actually weren't. Apple, on the other hand, they repositioned PCs in the consumer's mind, in some of the consumers, as being an old and boring product in their I'm a Mac, I'm a PC campaign. Of course, one of the biggest arenas where repositioning takes place is in politics, where a candidate is able to label his competitor as something completely different than what they are. The competitor is then forced to spend time, energy, and money to try and correct this perception. The last step in the segmentation process is getting the right marketing mix. Now, as you know, the marketing mix is basically the 4 P's of marketing, which is the product, price, place, and promotion. So having a great understanding of the market through segmentation analysis is important. All of these efforts can be completely wasted if the marketer fails in developing the right marketing mix. The key here is to develop the product that meets the needs of the selected target market, introduce it through the right marketing channel, get the message out to the members of the target market, and use the right promotional element, advertising and sales force. And of course, setting a price that will deliver value to the target while earning the company a profit. Sounds pretty easy, right? So finally, this week's discussion question. If you look at the functional positioning, the symbolic positioning, and the experiential positioning, look at those and understand what each one of them mean. And then look at these different brands. How do you think that each one of those are being positioned in the marketplace? I doubt that we could determine K-Swiss positioning given our limited familiarity with the brand, but I would assume that whatever positioning they have now, it's probably not the right one.